Age? It's just part of the story. Whether you're getting a head start or reaching new heights later on, it's all about what you do with your time. These are the stories of people proving that it's never too early or too late. This is Just a Number. Hello, one and all. I'm Daniel Steinfeld, and this is Just a Number. It's the inaugural episode, and I am pretty jacked to get going with a brand new podcast that has been a little while in the making. And this is where it all begins. You might have listened to me and my wife, Katie, in the past. We did have a podcast where we went over 200 episodes strong called Level Up. It's still out there and ready to be listened to. That was focused on the real estate community, which is where I work now. I run a brokerage in the Toronto area. But since ending that, there's been some things and some stuff going on. And since then, I've got the itch once again to get out there and talk with a whole new premise behind this particular podcast, Just a Number. Now, to tell you a little bit about me, I grew up in the 80s, a teenager in the 90s. I was into alternative music. I was there when hip hop started, the start of the internet. And now I'm a dad of four. I was the CFO and VP of a professional football team here in Toronto. As I said, I currently own a real estate brokerage with my wife. I sit on a couple of boards. And oh, yeah, I'm recovering from a current or recent triple bypass heart surgery in my early 40s. And so life has had a series of eye openers for me, some high highs, some low lows. But the premise behind this podcast really was brought on by personal circumstances where, by all accounts, I'm sort of a youngster for going through some of the good and some of the bad that I've been going through, most notably the health issues I've had in the last 6 months. And there's a whole lot I want to talk about over the course of this series, over the course of all these episodes, a lot to explain. But the best thing is that I am definitely the least interesting person you're going to meet in this podcast. This is also the only episode of Just a Number where I'll be the only one chatting with you. So rest assured, you're going to meet a whole bunch more people. I'm going to meet a whole bunch more people. I am pretty excited about that. And I'm really just a blip in a world of stories about people who take the concept of normal when we're talking about age and they turn it right on its head. So the idea for this show really is to dispel the myth that there are limitations, that there are boundaries to our own successes and failure, any risks we face, heights that we're climbing, really anything is possible. And I couldn't be more excited to learn from the people who have done those things, had the experiences, endured and worked through challenges, and really have just lived lives that wouldn't be expected at their age. Now, to be clear, this isn't at all just about people who are maybe younger than what you might expect and have done things that you'd think would be meant for much older folks. In fact, I really want to dispel this myth across the board, talk to people who might be considered old or older for the things that they've done. And ultimately, the goal here is to, again, highlight achievements, highlight challenges, and really motivate, inspire, and educate the listeners that are out there. And selfishly, along the way, do exactly the same thing for me, because I think that it's super important. In the past life we had podcasting, it was all about educating others. In the podcast my wife and I did for over 200 episodes strong and recently ended about 6 months ago when some of my health challenges started and really when we had reached the end of that particular road. But I've got that itch and I really love doing this. I love being out there, talking to an audience and again, learning more for myself. It's a great way to keep myself accountable to have great experiences. And what better way to do that than to meet a whole bunch of interesting people who are doing things that a lot of us would never necessarily think possible, or maybe just have the feeling, well, that could never happen to me, or I'm too young, or I'm too old. Well, really, I think for 99% of the things out there, that's all just a bunch of bullshit. There's no such thing as too young or too old. And that's why this podcast is called Just a Number. That's where that came from, because really our age is just that. And we make life what we choose to make it. And in a lot of cases, things in life choose us that we never would have seen coming because, again, we thought, hey, this is never going to happen to me. So, today, for the first episode, again, it's the only one where you're going to be talking to me, but I'm going to jump into a bit of the crazy stories and things that have happened to me over the last 6 months and prior to that, as it relates to these health issues. Um, while a lot of these episodes are hopefully going to be really built around the positive and motivating that way, I do think there is a considerable motivational element to what I've been dealing with. And one of the big motivating factors for talking about this here is the moment that I started to very subtly share what I had gone through after I had my surgery, the outpouring of feedback, support, and stories that I heard from people in a similar boat or who were nervous and thinking about the fact that they might be in a similar boat was overwhelming to me. And it was comforting in a lot of ways, but it opened my eyes to the fact that there's a lot of us out there who might be asking the questions and curious about things that they just don't know where to go with. And so um, I did start writing a book about my experience that really, again, was meant to answer a lot of these questions and speak to the process. I'm still working on that and it's coming together. But the more I wrote, the more I thought, you know what? This is the sort of thing I'd like to talk about openly and honestly and explore with others who have gone through similar things as well. So I'll take you back a few years ago. It was, I guess, October or November of 2021. It was the Scotiabank Waterfront Marathon in Toronto. I am not, by any accounts, a runner. I'm not unathletic, but I'm definitely not an athlete by any stretch. Um, but one of the things that I wanted to do was to set a personal goal, and I did for myself, of running a 10K. So it was the Scotiabank Marathon, which is considerably longer than 10 kilometers. But I also knew my limits at the time, and I knew, ironically, that running was not something that I was ever that comfortable with. Um, as much as I like playing sports and those sorts of things, endurance wasn't a thing for me. Spoiler alert, I kind of found out why towards the end of this. But for a few months prior to that, I did everything I could to try to train, teach my body what running a longer distance is like. And in all of my practices leading up to that 10K, I think I had only actually hit 10 kilometers running one time in several dozen attempts leading up to it. But that day was really important to me. I was also inspired considerably by my wife, Katie, who I'm sure I'm going to talk about and maybe have on the show quite a bit as well. But she had run an actual marathon a couple years prior, which was amazingly inspiring to me and to others out there as well, and helped me get off my ass to try to do a little bit of running myself. So, anyway, it was 2021, which right now is about 3 years ago. And I did the 10K. It was a great weather, no real complications. I think by all accounts, anybody else who was running was thanking their lucky stars that it was easy. I put that in quotations. Um, but I did it and I ran through and you know what? It didn't go terrible. I finished the 10 kilometers. That's not the exciting or the relevant part of the story, but what was really clear to me was the moment that 10K was done and I stopped and I slumped over and grabbed my knees, there was clearly something that was off. I had a feeling in my chest. I was short of breath. And this wasn't your typical out of breath. I just pushed myself, and I'll come out of this soon. This was a very new and scary pain that was going on in my chest that told me something's not right here. Um, Over the course of the day, I think I was able to shoo that off due to the fact that I had so much support from the people who were proud of me for doing the 10K, through our sharing on social media, through our whatever, high fives and all that. In the hours that came afterwards, that pain pretty quickly dissipated, and I didn't think much of it. I also really wasn't in the mood to do much more running, as I had figured I had reached the top of my personal mountain at that time, and we'd cross future bridges if and when they came down the road. Um, all that being said, um, I wasn't out of the woods, clearly, and over the course of the next weeks, things that I was doing that seemed relatively easy to me in the past were starting to get a little bit more uncomfortable. So nothing was a struggle to do, but it was becoming pretty clear that in doing a lot of seemingly easier types of physical activity, a jog, playing with the kids, things like that, more and more I was starting to get that recurring chest pain. And I went to my family doctor at the time, and I'm not a doctor goer historically, or prior to that. I wasn't someone who would ever really cry wolf. I wasn't really a hypochondriac. I wasn't somebody who would be nervous about every little thing, or at least I didn't pursue it if I was. I think a lot of us have feelings and have pains and concerns that we shoo away again just because either we feel that we don't have the time, or we're not important enough to look into it, or it's not important enough and it's all in our head. Or we just rely on, Dr. Google, which is terrible. And I think a lot of us would concur that that's not your best avenue to take. But in this particular case, I finally did, after a few weeks or maybe a couple of months, go to my family doctor and say, listen, this doesn't feel right. Chest is hurting. And the doctor, checked the levels and did all the things, and ultimately said, you know what, it's stress. That's pretty common. You're healthy, you're not overweight, none of your levels are out of whack in a way that's too considerably crazy. So, you know what, just take it easy, try to calm yourself. You seem to lead a busy life. You've got the four kids, you've got all this stuff going on, you own a business. So maybe you just need to take it easy, which now 2020 hindsight, stress is one of those things that a lot of people shoo away almost every symptom to. It's a very easy excuse, and in a lot of cases it might be accurate. Um, so in this case, I took it away and started to try to take it easy in a way that I knew how, which wasn't very take it easy. We also were still sort of in the midst of the pandemic at the time. So life wasn't entirely normal, although relaxing and not being too active might have been a little bit easier at that time because there weren't a lot of people gathering and doing things that were wild and crazy. All that being said, nothing really improved. Nothing got any better. So I reluctantly took the family doctor's advice, understanding that it could just be in my head or it could just be a stress thing. And again, I didn't want to be a strain on an already strained medical system from what I'd been seeing out there, although I hadn't used it much to that point. As a 40 or 41-year-old, seemingly healthy young man, I basically said, okay, stress it is. And I went home. And that really didn't sit well with me as things didn't get better. I did take it easy, but that didn't really change the fact that even the lightest of activities were not feeling great. So it wasn't long before I went back and insisted with my family doctor that, you know what, even if it is stress, there's got to be a better test, maybe a stress test that I could do or something to take a better look at this. I think that was the first understanding that I had, and definitely a common thread among people that I've talked to, is that you don't feel good not having an answer. And it's not that you want to get bad news, but when the only explanation you have is something that's pretty vague and doesn't actually address the problem, it doesn't make you feel any better. And if stress was in fact the issue, me not knowing why it still hurt and it just being deemed to be stress really just made me more stressed. So it was a bit of a cyclical issue. And at that point, that's what I thought it was, is that sure, I'm stressed because this hurts and I don't really like it being that way. And chances are, if I want to maintain a lifestyle of being pretty busy and trying to be all things to all people and all that, stress is probably going to come with the territory for a pretty long time. So anyway, my family doctor did agree to refer me to a cardiologist, which was the next step. And it took quite some time to get an appointment. But when I did go with the cardiologist, it was much the same diagnosis or expectation that I heard from him. Everybody was very nice. This wasn't a patronizing approach to me, so I didn't take anything as I must be crazy, but it was more of a, we don't disbelieve that it hurts, but the reason for that, based on what we're seeing, is you're just leading a very busy and stressful lifestyle and you need to take it easy. So I did do a stress test. It didn't show anything abnormal, which again was not the most comforting thing in the world to me because I kind of wanted it to show something abnormal but not dangerous. Um, but anyway, this continued for a little while, and I'd say about 6 months from the first moment after that 10K, I did convince the cardiologist to order up a CT for me, because I needed to see what was going on in there or have someone look at what's going on in there and just rule out the big stuff for me. I had a pretty strong sense of comfort that there was nothing wrong because that's what everyone was telling me. But I wanted that comfort myself. Um, so it took a great deal of time to get this CT. If you are a listener in Canada, you probably understand that with free healthcare comes longer lines and more people who are trying to take advantage of it. And a very, again, strained healthcare system means those with more urgency are going to be seen first, which is understandable. And I can respect that. Again, I didn't really feel a reason that there was urgency other than the fact that it kept being uncomfortable, which was kind of a piss off to me. And the CT was agreed to be ordered up really when the pain was starting in things as simple as walking the kids to school. So when everyday activities were generating not debilitating, but pretty uncomfortable chest pain, it led to my need to have something like this done. And then while I was waiting for the CT, which did last, that was a waiting period of over a year. To put it into perspective, the pain was getting slightly worse. And when I started feeling it, not just in my chest, but down my left arm, that's where, I mean, TV drama and medical things that you hear and read about started to go through my head because I am definitely no doctor. But now I'm starting to think, these are all the signs and things you hear about that have to do with the heart. There must be something going on. And I couldn't wait much longer for the CT to take place. So I did get the CT, which for those of you who haven't seen it, it's one of those big machines that you sort of lie on your back and you roll into it. Looks very 2001: A Space Odyssey. Um, and it takes pictures of the inside. So it's kind of like an X-ray, but it's not for your bones. And it starts to get a feel for what's happening with the flow, with the way that your arteries in this particular case are or aren't blocked up. Maybe they're thinned, maybe they're not. And does anything look abnormal? So the CT took place. As is the case with any medical test, I didn't really have any information from the technicians working there, nor could they give me any. So, as much as I thought I could read people, I couldn't really read the room as to whether anything was good or bad. But again, I had a lot of discomfort. I probably had a little bit more worry than I did going into all this, that something was actually wrong. But still, to this point, everybody was telling me there's really nothing to worry about. And I just lead a stressful life. And I'm not listening to the doctor's advice to just take it easy. Um, it wasn't 48 hours before I got a call back to go see the cardiologist for a follow-up. Um, so it wasn't the next day, which made me think it wasn't anything devastating, but it also wasn't a week later or a message that said, we don't need to see you. So I was a bit nervous and I went in to see the cardiologist. And I just remember him coming into the room. And he's a man who is my age, basically, and also has I don't know if it's four kids, but has kids, and I think um, for both of us, it was important that we kind of saw each other on an equal sort of life stage level. And so I could see the discomfort in his face when he came in the room, and he basically said, I don't know how to tell you this. I thought I was dying. I thought there was a major problem, which at that point there really wasn't. But he said, "You've got coronary artery disease." And coronary artery disease sounds, well, it is a very bad thing, but it sounds like the kind of thing that without context, you're like, holy shit, like I had a heart attack, I had this, my heart's going to explode, what's going on? Um, but basically, it just means that there is a significant enough blockage in your heart that prevents or impedes the blood flow that should be flowing through your heart. Obviously, the heart is it's the central station for blood flow in your body, and blood flow is necessary to power everything in you, not the least of which being your brain, but everything else around you. It's there to keep you alive. So if something's impeding the flow in any way, that's something that needs to be addressed. So he said, that's something, it doesn't have a cure necessarily. You're going to have that for the rest of your life, and you're going to probably be on some drugs the rest of your life, but let's get this addressed because you didn't have a heart attack. And from what we can see in the CT, you've got one or two arteries that are 70% or more blocked up, which is pretty substantial, but not untreatable. And the good news is, at my age, it's actually something that's a little easier to go at because my body can deal with the procedures and things that need to take place in a pretty easy, I'll say loosely way. Um, so I was scheduled to do what's called an angiogram, and an angiogram is where a surgeon will go through one of a couple places. In this particular case, it was my wrist, and they can feed through your wrist a dye and a camera of sorts. It's almost like an ultrasound. If you've ever, you know, been pregnant or you've known somebody who's pregnant and you've gone for the ultrasound and you can see the little screen next to you, it's got a similar vibe to it, only it's your heart. And so it's a procedure you're actually awake for. And I remember lying on the table very vividly where the plan was they were going to go in, look at the arteries that were blocked according to the CT, and very likely, if they could, during the same time of making sure they see what's in there, they would stent it, which is basically a little balloon that gets put into the blocked arteries and just opens up. And it opens up to do just that for your arteries, to open up the artery and let blood flow through a little bit easier. Um, and it might be one or two stents because that's what the CT saw. And provided no other complications, more or less in and out, not without discomfort, not without some recovery time attached to it. Definitely still a procedure, but not anything that would cause much alarm. And it should be stated that to this point, I hadn't really opened up about this to virtually anybody. Definitely none of my friends. Um, but really just close family were all who knew about it at this point, really because for me, this was still being brought on by stress. For some reason, that was the story I still had in my head. And nothing would stress me more than more and more people knowing about this going on. And as much as I appreciate support and all that, it would have been a stressful situation prior to having it addressed, to have more and more people knowing about it and asking me questions. So I was pretty tight-lipped about it. And the plan was to go in, have this angiogram, get it all looked at, get it all stented up, and move on with life. So I'm on the table, and the surgeon is there with a couple of other doctors alongside, and there's a big, like, HD, bigger than I have at my house television right to my left as I'm lying there, and I'm watching my heart in real time, and it's a pretty cool thing. I'm awake. It's just my arm is frozen. Really wasn't that uncomfortable. It was actually, all things considered, I'm like, this isn't terrible. Um, but it wasn't long before the surgeon who was in there, who was talking, and I was conscious and aware, he basically said, "Oh shit, we've got to close you up." That's not what I wanted to see. And that's not what you want to hear when you're lying on a table with somebody in your heart at the time, and you don't know what you're looking at, and you don't know what's going on. But the doctor did that, closed me up. There were no stents. The angiogram, as a procedure, takes a much more detailed picture because it's in there and it's 3D and it sees it all and the things that a CT might not have seen, taking a picture from one side. So if you picture, taking a picture of a forest from one side, you're not going to see the trees on the other side. Or you might not necessarily see that there's a deer halfway through, so on and so forth. Maybe a bad analogy, but that's the idea. And so in this particular case, the angio uncovered that it wasn't just one or two arteries with a 70% blockage, but in fact, I had eight blockages in my heart, and one of them was 100%. And several of them were more than 70%, which is considered um, basically critically in need of being addressed. Um, I was effectively a walking time bomb um, because there were spots in my heart that the blood flow was limited, if at all. And it was a very clear explanation why every time I exerted even the smallest amount of energy, my chest would start hurting because my heart was working to pump blood through narrower and narrower hallways, some that had been shut off almost entirely. And because of that, it would hurt because it was working really hard to do something that shouldn't have been that hard. And so at this point, um, it was time to move on to plan B, which is I don't think an angiogram and stents are going to work. It was very likely the case that I'm going to need bypass surgery, and that is open heart surgery. That's the big deal that you hear about where they've got to, and I won't get too graphic, but they've got to go in there. They've got to basically crack your ribs open and do the work uh, from the outside in. And bypass being taking um, one pipe from one place and repiping the way that the flow is going in your heart because the pipes that are in there are not working too well. So it's not about clearing out the blocked stuff. It's about creating an entirely new passageway, a bypass, if you will, that lets the blood flow more freely through new parts that are being taken from other parts of my body. So notwithstanding how much of a stress and discomfort and fear and all that went through this, I do need to acknowledge how cool science is, how amazing it is that one day some doctor somewhere decided maybe this is a way that a problem like this could be addressed because it blew my mind what the procedure was. I will say that I didn't want to know, or I didn't know most of what the procedure was till it was over, because it probably would have scared the crap out of me and made things more uncomfortable and stressful than they ultimately already were maxing out at. Um, but it was in a really weird way, it was validating to me because, as I mentioned before, you just want to know something's wrong and you want to know it can be fixed. Can't always be fixed, but just because I was a seemingly healthy 40 something with no real known history, which came out later, I did have some history in my family, but um, really nothing that would point to this. People, even the medical community, assumed that it couldn't possibly be something like that. And it took a tremendous amount of self advocacy to just get it looked at. And for this particular story, the biggest lesson I can give to anybody is you know yourself better than anybody else does. And whether or not you're paranoid, it doesn't matter. If something makes you uncomfortable, if something doesn't feel right, you're going to rip yourself up about it and you're going to get more and more into a downward spiral until it's addressed. So you need to ask the questions. You need to, do what might feel like bothering people, pestering, and you need to keep doing that until you have the answers that make you comfortable. Because there's nothing more important than your health, the health of your family. And in my particular case, it took multiple levels of self advocacy. And I want to give shout outs also to the people I did bring into my circle and bring into the story, the tougher that this got because I did abruptly cut off the story. I'm going to go into much more detail. I'm sure talk about it in future episodes if it's relevant with other talks I'm having with people. But one thing that was super helpful and can't be understated is that when I did start to bring people in and let them know, and that happened after the angiogram, when I knew I needed a triple bypass, well, I didn't know it was a triple bypass, but when I knew I needed a bypass, it became scarier to the point that it was overwhelming to just do it on my own or just myself and my wife. Um, and so a couple of close, trusted friends knew about it as well. And without me asking, they brought professionals into the fold with whom they had connections. I was able to have more detailed conversations with more doctors, with more people, with no skin in the game whatsoever, other than just understanding that this is a stressful situation and people who had expertise from different areas. Um, it made me a lot more comfortable to know not just that I had a second opinion, but that I had a focused opinion of not even my own surgeon. My own surgeon was great. Um, but there is a certain automation to the process and an impersonality that doctors need to have in order to do their jobs. And when I was able to have some other people to talk to who could give me advice and opinion without overwhelming me, and in a lot of cases, validation, it was super helpful. And I do believe that although they might not have been advocating directly to the people I was working with or getting the procedure done by, it was a big help. There were connections made and opportunities that I probably otherwise wouldn't have had if I didn't ask more questions and engage more people on my journey to getting better. So the procedure did happen, obviously. It happened February 1st, 2024. Um, there's a lot to it. It was and continues to be not an easy road. Recovering afterwards, the hardest of it was most certainly in the days and weeks that followed the procedure. Now being about 6 months removed, I'm virtually good as new. I'm really happy to say the prognosis is great. The nice thing about a procedure like this, and it happening even so young, is that A, I didn't have a heart attack and it was addressed before anything that was permanently damaging happened. B, I can make the lifestyle changes and have an understanding of what led to it in the first place, and also what I can do to prevent it going forward. So I am on a lifetime full of all kinds of drugs and a prescriptive cocktail every day, but it's all there to address that which we know is off um, in and around the heart area right now. So nothing is, knock on wood, going to get worse if I take care of myself and continue um, taking this medicine. And the other great thing is that this wasn't just a band-aid or a stop that kind of maintains me at discomfort, but not, chronic pain. This, in fact, reverses the pain that I was having because now things are flowing again and things I could not do prior to the surgery, I'm able to do again. So the only thing right now I'm not yet doing is running, but I'm back to doing things I like to do. I'm drumming quite a bit, which is the cardio. I'm in rehab once a week. And it's funny when we talk about just a number, I am half the age of everybody else who's in this cardiac rehab program. Everyone in there, their ages start with an 8 generally. And I'm the youngster in the room. And sure, I'm doing today. I had rehab this morning and I actually slowed down what I had been doing versus the last several weeks of rehab because I've been told I'm overdoing it. And as much as I want to push myself and I want to, act my age, you need to have an understanding of what is best for you. And in a lot of cases, it's amazing that now that my fears were validated and it's been understood what the problem was, and it's very clearly the problem. People take me a lot more seriously now and are treating it with a little bit more of a respect and a care, which is unfortunate, but fortunate in that I'm able now to get the advice that it's not sort of with an asterisk on it. It's not people saying, we don't think there's anything wrong with you, but fine, if you're nervous, here's stuff you can do. Now it's, oh shit, you went through this. We know that there is, a problem in there that's being fixed, and it's our job to help you get there. So here are the steps, and we're going to take things seriously. Um, you don't need to, and I hope none of you have to go through a major surgery or an event like that in order to get the help that you might need or that you're looking for. But you do need to press hard, especially in the time prior to something being identified, which again, hopefully it never is. But if something's bugging you, continue to ask, question, and don't settle until you have the answer that's important to you. Um, this is kind of an example with a podcast like this. When I talk about the negative still being motivational, I'm hoping that the stories that we go through over the course of this series are motivating you not just to understand what your potential is, whatever your age is, and that anything's possible at any time if you put your mind to it, but also that just because you are a certain age, it doesn't leave you immune to things you might not expect. But there's ways to address it, be prepared for it, and come out stronger on the other side. So I'm proud to say, again, things are going really well. I'm really happy to start a podcast like this going forward. Again, this is the only episode. It's only going to be me that you're talking to, but um, I'm excited to continue dialogues like this with other people, both inside the podcast and especially out of it. Again, the number of people I've been able to talk to and hear their stories and get their help and give them help wherever I can has been incredible. And I really, my eyes have been open to the value of people sharing and being able to just be comfortable with the uncomfortable. This was a vulnerable moment for me when I went through this. I did ask myself quite a bit, the why me stuff and all those cliche things. It definitely is a natural part of going through something like this. Um, but I can tell you, it has been very liberating, even though all I ever did was put out one message with a thumbs up on Facebook when the surgery was done. That in itself has introduced me to dozens and probably maybe even a couple hundred different people who are going through things and are nervous themselves and are now comfortable to talk about the stuff that they didn't think, you know, would be taken seriously because of their age or because of their seeming, healthy lifestyle, which it is. Um, but shit happens in the same way that good things happen. So, anyway, that is episode one. That is all that I wanted to go through today, is giving you a little bit of an insight into some of the challenge that you can go through at any age. We're going to meet lots more people who have had some good, some bad, some ugly, but in all cases, it is inspirational and I can't really wait to get going. I invite you, if you haven't already, please subscribe and join us when we're chatting with all these folks because age is just a number. And I can't wait to learn more about the kinds of things people do, despite what people think they should be doing. I'm Daniel Steinfeld, and I'll talk to you next time.